That should be great.
There we go.
I want something low growing.
Yeah. I want to say my Catman's like.
Yeah. It'll also take a share.
It does. And then I think my guess actually. Nice, or I keep on the I wanted to get really loud.
Your mom is like right close to the original.
Yes, but my sound is very loud. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Can't find all this. Once they're.
So I have my friend. And so she has her phone. But I go went a little bit.
I think it might have a little bit. I'll talk about yourself. Alright, so we'll say this.
Yeah.
Scott, I think we're there in about 2 minutes.
Yeah.
So it's got.
What happened to the word chief on your title?
So you say don't bother. I don't like chief.
We don't like.
You get to vote. Good stream. Yeah, they go busy. I don't think.
And it's less than 40, you know.
Okay. So here's the
It's like when we're in,
You can see that.
but I try not to just overpower it, like, circle, towards the side of the there,
Weird one. Still work those? And they're really playing.
and then, we'll be told not to use.
I tried to watch one five today.
Well, you probably have like.
Okay, virtual attendees, can you hear us? Yes, okay.
I got stopped.
Jill, Nicole, assuming you can hear us.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Yep.
This is maybe. It's great. I loved it, yeah. Okay, Mr. Chair, we're ready.
Good afternoon. Thanks for getting that set up, Tim. It is 4:49, July 9th, 2024. We'll call this meeting of the Charlotte Tree Advisory Commission to order. For the sake of virtual, should we run around and just say names for roll?
Jill, can you advise on how to do roll call with a hybrid meeting?
Hey, sorry, y'all. I'm having a hard time hearing. Can somebody speak up or get closer?
The microphones are on the ceiling.
You can get closer.
We're just gonna note the roll call. We don't have to take it one by one, correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
I would say do that just out of an abundance of caution, since you've got some on
Sure.
virtual and some here, and just, that way you got it.
Yes, audible roll call for attendance for any voting, since this is considered a hybrid or virtual meeting, since you have a commissioner attending remotely. Sorry, I apologize if I'm repeating anything that anybody said. It's hard to hear y'all.
That's helpful, thank you.
All day.
Thank you, Sarah. Please.
Elizabeth McGann's present. Sarah Harper.
Scott Roberts, present.
Kevin Mason present.
Charlie Welch here.
Tom Sutherland present. I like it, just Nate Eggert present.
Elliot Maurice present.
Please.
Lori Reed present.
Henry Kunzig present. Tim Porter, Urban Forester.
Teresa Ray present. Karen Weatherly, City Attorney's Office.
Thank you for that.
You need the ones.
Fine.
Sarah, Nicole, or Jill?
Just need Sarah.
Yes,
Sarah Gagne, present.
Mr. Chair, if I may, point of order. Point of order for everybody. Virtual attendance, there is a greater need to not talk over others as much as possible, mostly for the sake of our online virtual attendees. So if I could ask the board to consider Robert's rules a little bit more for hybrid meetings, and maybe a little hand wave to have the floor and online. We certainly welcome comments. We can use I'm used to Teams, which has the hand, but is there a question? Sarah, we'll make sure we get you involved. So I just want, if there's a way for us to raise your hand in the chat somehow, that we can make sure you can get a chance to speak. That will work.
I can also, there's a little symbol in Zoom that you can use to raise your hand, so I'll do that. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Sarah. We're gonna go ahead and get rolling on the whole business. Tim, for the sake of efficiency, you both have your name next to them, so if you want to roll from 1 and 2, have at it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the Charlotte Tree Manual, I just wanted to provide an update for the board. We do expect an update in August. So I do expect Teresa will send you an update of proposed edits to the tree manual. It will not be a lengthy, significant redlining, but there will be a few key updates. So look for that coming your way prior to the August meeting. All I have on that topic. I welcome any questions, comments. There are none. I'm happy to move on to item number 2. Okay. So updates on the tree canopy program. This is something we proposed last month to the board, making it a regular item. And this pertains to programs that are part of the Community Tree Canopy Preservation Division. On the other side of the divisions, Henry manages urban forestry, the regulatory side. And this would be an update when there are any to the program side, such as the Tree Canopy Preservation Program, Canopy Care, and the city's partnership with Tree Charlotte. I do not have any very specific or major updates today, but I do have a couple of things I wanted to share specifically related to the Tree Canopy Preservation Program, also known as TCPP. This is a program the city takes payment in lieu during permitting collected by Henry's team, Urban Forestry, for tree save. In lieu of preserving tree save, developers may submit a payment. The city takes that revenue and acquires land for conservation for tree canopy preservation purposes. I wanted to briefly show 2 acquisitions we're pursuing, just to start kind of getting in the habit of coming to you to show what we're doing. We also, sometime later this summer, we'd like to present the updated program strategy. We're gonna have a new acquisition strategy and then scoring model that values certain things like proximity to where fees were collected, urban heat, existing forested land versus vacant property, things like that. Don't have that today, that will be forthcoming over the summer. What I'd like to show is just a quick update on 2 acquisition strategies, or properties, excuse me, that we're pursuing right now. Any questions before I dive into that? Okay. Just zoom in a while here, so bear with me. How do I get that? Polaris. See if I can show this. So this is a map that we use to help us evaluate properties. It's an internal map. We're seeking to build a public version sometime in the next, I'll say 12 months, 12 to 18 months, that provides, it shows tree canopy preservation program properties, among other things like tree safe, perimeter trees, city trees, things like that. And so I'm going to quickly go through a couple things that we use. This is Mecklenburg County. Obviously, the big blue lines are interstates. Some things we use as guidance for property acquisition for this program are community planning areas. So with the adoption of the 2040 comprehensive plan, the old growth framework of center, corridor, and wedge was essentially retired, repealed. It no longer applies to growth and development of the city. There's the new vision. Charlotte 2040 plan has this framework of community planning areas. So the city is divided into, I believe, 13 different areas. If you imagine a dartboard, there's the center, and there's the outer and the middle. As far as TCPP, this is valuable because there's a proximity requirement that we have to consider when acquiring property. So, for example, if I zoom into the south middle here, there's a mandate for us to consider acquiring land in the south middle planning area related to how many tree safe payment in lieu fees came out of that area, if that makes sense. It's not a very simple process to do. To talk about it is because it seems simple. The money came out of there, buy the land within there. This program acquires the land, fee simple. We don't use eminent domain. We do accept donations, but we have to compete on the open market with every other entity, developers, CMS, the county, et cetera. So at times it's hard to really hold consistent to that mandate, but we do value that, we do weigh that. It goes into our scoring model and evaluation process. Does that make sense? Okay. I'll zoom back out.
So do you have any major donors, or do you seek donors?
She'll speak up again, just so I
Sorry.
Yeah.
Do you have any major donors, or are you actively like seeking donations for that category?
Right now, the only revenue stream is developer paid fee in lieu dollars, but we are exploring with this new acquisition strategy we're working on other types of revenue or funding. So it could be grant programs, it could be corporate sponsorship, it could be other sources. So right now we don't have any specific donors, but we would like to explore additional ways to bring money into the fold, in part to acquire more land, protect more land, but also to support parts of the program like the Arboretum Trail, which is seeking to acquire and protect land in urban areas with some placemaking and obviously a trail component that provides engagement opportunities. We're essentially building pocket parks to some degree. They're very passive use. Our conservation dollars, I'm looking at Karen to make sure I don't step out of line. Conservation dollars that are currently used for TCDP, we can't use them to build patios or certain gathering spaces, because that's not really the true purpose of that money. That's intended to buy land. We can plant trees, we can provide mulch, more of the conservation specific things. So additional revenue would also help us to provide outdoor classrooms, some type of design level, hardscaping and things like that. But we primarily want to find additional revenue to buy more land.
Yes. Sarah, I'm sure.
Oh. Yes, Sarah.
I was just wondering, when you were talking about buying land where the tree save revenue was generated in these different community planning areas, does that exacerbate any bias in the distribution of tree canopy across the city with respect to things like income? Is that considered at all?
Great question. So we're currently trying to determine the value associated with certain variables like that. How closely should we follow? I'm using my construction site voice right now just to make sure everybody can hear. We're trying to find the right level of how strong do you stay within that district, if you will, because South Middle planning area, there's a lot of canopy down there, there's a lot of development. So the argument's very strong to go back in there and spend the dollars there, but as we know, in the Crescent, there's other things like income and canopy equity issues, higher temperatures. The argument's very strong on that issue to spend dollars there where it's needed. The benefits of trees, it might be needed more. So I'm not sure if it exasperates it right now, but it's something that we need to be more strategic and intentional on. So I know that didn't quite answer your question, but we don't traditionally we haven't held 100% solely focused to the district that the funding came out of, because one, we could not compete very well at all. Development customers, other entities can close quicker. It takes us at best 6 months to close on a property. So we have to find other ways to be competitive to acquire land, but also meet our strategic goals.
I would think that, I mean, you identify like the Crescent, right? Like that's a known area, or demographically higher heat island effect issues, lack of access to grocers, less tree canopy. I mean, I would think that your dollar would go further in those areas because those areas are yet to gentrify and be on the map. And for developers today, right? They're very focused on Valentine and that area. They're very focused on South End. They're very focused on Noda, Plaza Midwood, Fremont West areas. They're less focused on those lower areas. So I think you'd the opportunity for your dollar to go further, and when it comes to acquiring land would be better. Just something to keep in mind.
I agree.
And you may find that the correlation is there's less tree canopy there already, right? So your dollars could probably go further.
Right. So here's my layer. I was trying to turn on the corridors of opportunity. This isn't a 100% clear correlation to everything you just talked about, Elliot, but it's very close. So in those areas, temperatures are higher, canopy is lower in general. And we are strategically going to target those areas with this program. It's just determining how
you weight it.
Right, and if we're too prescriptive on our policy and strategy, historically, it's really constrained us and limited our impact, but we have to be more intentional and strategic. One thing that's come up as we've looked through this is if we start acquiring a lot of land in those areas, that potentially could have an impact on housing needs, which I say potentially, I'm not sure how much this program really could ever have a huge impact on housing. I don't know how much of the inventory, if you will, it really could impact. But related to that, we're talking with our affordable housing colleagues, and Tara's not here to talk about that, she's out of the country right now, or she could give me this update, probably be a little bit more polished. But affordable housing, we're looking to partner with in the future to see if we can kind of check multiple boxes at times. Appreciate that feedback. I saw another hand up.
Well, just say the same thing Ellen did, I guess, what Sarah brought up. Although I would add, I think Elliot said you'd be more successful maybe in other areas. I'm not sure you'd be successful at all in the inner south or whatever that section is. I don't see how we buying land to remain undeveloped can ever be competitive with anyone who's going to develop, right? Or even the city buying a school, right? Less of it is just undevelopable.
Yeah, I was gonna add that, Charlie, the last property that you highlighted for us was that one. It's right in the middle of Providence Road.
Right, I remember that.
5 creeks going through it.
Right.
Yeah, it could have been developed, but it was gonna cost a lot.
Yeah.
I think that's.
So the more we can do, this is an opportunity to kind of have less regulation. And I understand the concept, it's a great concept, but you know, if we start putting down 13 districts and everything's gotta stay in those 13, and then we're gonna tire hands up and never do anything. So try not to be too restrictive to the extent you can or ask for that, whatever. Let's buy where we can. If it's all in that west inner or northern inner, that's not a bad outcome. Because I think it may be all, or just don't know how successful it would be in some areas.
I agree, and historically so with conservation, this program is based on a conservation model that's like a nonprofit land trust model. And one of the core foundation, land trusts have a strategic plan, but a lot of their work is opportunistic in nature. You have to have it, or you wouldn't really accomplish much. And so to your point, Charlie, historically TCPP has been very opportunistic, in some cases maybe too opportunistic. And I think we need to maintain some level of, when an opportunity comes forward that checks a lot of boxes, but maybe not every strategic. Depending on our funding level and some recent history and how everything's weighed and scored, we should consider it. And I know for a fact, I don't have it in front of you now, but a lot of millions of dollars have been collected out of South Middle. So, and we don't have the equivalent amount of land that those millions of dollars equals. So I don't think we'll ever have an equal amount of land for the dollar amount collected in every district. It's likely never to happen, but it's definitely one strategic area we look at. But we also got to focus on the items that Sarah mentioned, Elliot mentioned. But sometimes it's a great, like the property Nate you mentioned, it's called Lakeside right off Providence Road. I think it was 11 acres. It's in the South Middle. I think we're out there, maybe 2 to 3 acres were developable. The rest of it was community FEMA floodplain. So there's arguments in everything you do. Someone could argue like, why did you buy it? Most of it's already protected anyway, because it's impacted by floodplain regulations. This program could manage that land probably to a higher level, but we did preserve some land that was potentially developable. We saw a sketch plan for a minor subdivision. But then again, someone could argue, are you trying to stop development? So it's difficult because you got both sides in every topic.
There's a fine balance.
There is a really fine balance, but I do think opportunistic is something we really should value greatly.
This program, are you guys only trying to identify, like, as an example, forested land that can be maintained, or would you guys, like, so I'm looking at, going back to the Crescent as an example, right? A lot of that's, I'm sure a lot of that's brownfield, there's heavy industrial use in there, a lot of it's been clear cut and is probably foul land at this point. Are you guys looking at these investment opportunities or acquisition opportunities with a budget to replant them as well? Or does it need to be a piece of land that has existing tree canopy that you're just kind of stepping into from a conservation
We're
standpoint?
looking at both. Originally, the intent and purpose of Tree Safe was to preserve existing forest and to require properties developing with Tree Safe that they'd have a patch of the traditional forest on their property. And over time, that's evolved. And we still value that existing forest, and we rate that very high when we score and evaluate properties. But the need to get canopy into areas to lower temperatures, to do many other things, we have to consider other lands, including lands with impervious cover. So, yeah, we're open to everything. Yes, Thomas?
Perfect, good, because I'm glad you asked that question, because for me, new trees are just as good, or will eventually be as good as existing trees. So limiting yourselves to areas that just have trees that qualify as well. And I'm going to disagree with everyone just because that's what I do. I also think it's important that those areas are also important, like you might be able to spend some dollars and go outside of those areas, but those communities are the ones that lost trees, so there's still an importance for those communities to get trees back. So while equity, heat island, those things are important, like if I lost trees in my community, like I would like to see that, because otherwise, I think you described it before, the green wheel, where all the development spins all the trees to the outside of the city. And if you get a state where it's cheapest or easiest or impoverished or whatever else, you're just gonna end with a ring of trees on the outside in a very hot, barren center city, so.
Yes, well said. It's a delicate balance. It's also not the only tool we have. So I think sometimes we have to keep that perspective. To Thomas's point, like the locational mandate, it's there, you know, potentially down the road, maybe we need to change our policy to be more open to more, you know, flexible locations with this program, but there's other programs that we could utilize like canopy care, other tree planting programs to really get into the crescent. It's a multi-pronged approach. Quickly, I want to also show the aerial image here. We are also trying to be very creative in this program. At times, we can take properties that aren't as desirable or valuable for development or other reasons and use them for canopy, including properties the city owns. So I'm going to leave the corridors of opportunity up here. It's a teal, turquoise. If I zoom in, these parcels in that turquoise color are city-owned properties. So we're currently near the end of an internal evaluation process that is piggybacking something that department directors have done over the last few years, where they've identified existing city-owned properties for potential uses. There's multiple environmental classifications. There's a tree camping classification. So with this program, we've identified properties we think that would make good sense for our program, TCPP, that we may in the near future request shifting them into TCPP because there is no additional use, or this is the best use, would be tree camping conservation. We have already acquired multiple properties that were already internal, so we didn't pay to acquire them. With this program, they're already in the property inventory, and we've repurposed them to tree canopy preservation program.
This is totally off topic, and I apologize. Well, not off topic, but because if you look at that map, obviously the airport is, I think, probably has a big impact on those neighborhoods and kind of how just environmentally is there anything from, they get a lot of money and there's a lot of people that are flowing through the airport but not actually from Charlotte. Is there anything funding wise out there that airports can contribute to help the neighbors that are surrounding them? That's a great question. Let me clarify. The airport owned property is not shown here. This is non-airport city owned property, but if the airport property was shown, this whole swath, like there's so much airport owned. Right. So I'm not certain about funding. I can share that we're in discussions with the airport leadership and management about the urban forest master plan related to their development impacts. So we're hoping to pursue things like tree safe banks, planting programs, kind of related to, I think, the concerns you mentioned, particularly geared towards the areas they're impacting. So another high value component here with the airport is that they're directly related, adjacent to multiple corridors of opportunities. So we're looking into that. We haven't made it very far yet.
So can you accept donated land for TCPP?
Yes, we can. We have actually. We've at least one property was a former construction debris landfill in North Charlotte and ETJ that has been, I don't know the right term, but it's been cleaned up, right? I mean, the reclamation work is completed, the state signed off, and it was just construction debris. It wasn't, there's no methane leaks and things like that. It was concrete slabs and things. I think it's 5 acres, it's TCPP, and we want to establish some type of acquisition workflow for donations as well.
Because I'm sure they get a tax benefit from that donation.
In that specific case, the benefit was they didn't have to pay taxes anymore, but there are other tax benefit opportunities related to land donation. Obviously I'm out of my lane here, but there is opportunity for property owners. If you donate your land and it's valued at a certain level, and if you sell or donate it below that, there's a percentage benefit that can help you with your tax bill. There was a very significant tax benefit on the books up until 2015 or 16, the state assembly. Yes, there are some benefits available to property owners. We've also utilized some remnant right-of-way. So I think the 3rd Ward Gathering Garden, 4th Ward Gathering, 3rd, 5th, it's right.
You're both right. I always say 4th, but it's right on 4th Street Extension and Johnson and Wales Way.
Okay, thank you. Obviously,
I always get it.
Yeah. I will zoom in.
So it's called the Gathering Garden, or is there a bigger name?
Gathering Garden.
Got it.
It is right a little bit more.
Oh.
No, go to the right.
Yeah.
There it is. So this is not a parcel, this is remnant right of way. There used to be turn lanes going through that, and this intersection was realigned, capital project, and this patch of mud was left that AT&T, the utility companies, parked at. It's a nice little spot in Uptown, you can park some trucks, and and so TCPP worked with CDOT and work to create a community vision for it, and within TCPP, the Urban Arboretum Trail, which is part of TCPP, we created this pocket park. And so we planted as many trees as possible. There's a lot of things in the ground, sewer and utilities, all types. And this is another way we're trying to be creative to move the needle a little bit in Uptown, an area where it's really hard to compete to buy land. This was land we already controlled. It was a right of way, so not a property acquisition. No money was spent on acquiring that. A lot of time was spent on getting permissions from appropriate agencies.
That is a great segue to my question, because the biggest piece of city-owned land in the city is right-of-ways. So how much TCPP money gets spent on putting street trees in places where it does not exist?
We don't plant street trees with that program.
Can you not? I mean, if you're looking to really reduce or heat island effect and pollution, all these things, like how do you, that's where it goes to have the biggest impact for benefits. So how does that?
Not with that money, that payment in lieu money, because it has to be preserved, and those trees may be taken down for development or CDOT or NCDOT or.
Well, that's not necessarily true, because we have a streets map that tells us where the trees are going, right?
Now I'm out of my league, but the whole idea is to preserve it, and that's what we do. We say you can't here, and I don't know about the right of way. That seems to me to be too iffy, but.
I think on a high level policy wise, we wanted a multi-pronged approach. We wanted to develop other initiatives to plant trees. So in this situation, TCPP has a site adjacent to the right of way. We planted trees in the right of way using TCPP dollars, but we've limited our work to strategically just looking at that. There's canopy care, there's a street tree planting program that Lori manages. There's other programs that we would like to use to really target those issues while balancing, and I definitely appreciate Lori commenting, the need for maintenance and care of these trees, because historically we planted, and the care of these trees has been nowhere near the same level. I don't know if you have anything to share.
Well,
would the same level of care be required for a house which you purchased and planted versus one that's next to the street? Because I guess you're not concerned that they're gonna fall in a car, so you maintain them more.
It depends on how you plant it. If you're planting for like a Henry Chapman and it's like a forestry type spacing, they will naturally bend themselves up. You don't have to do active management like you do for a street tree. Let it be low over the street, cars, vehicles. So a tree in a not a natural environment like the street in the South is different than the tree in a conservation acreage.
So it's almost though that for the right of way trees, like that your initial cost is significantly less because you don't have to purchase and acquire land, but your long-term maintenance costs are high, so. Right, they kind of balance.
I don't know. It depends, so there's definitely some truth to that, but I think it depends on the property type, like this property here, which is not a tax parcel, but this site will take a significant amount of resources to maintain, because there's trails, they have to be ADA compliant. There's mowing, there's blowing, there's pollinator gardens, on a wooded property, there's certainly some type of forest management that has to take place. But the cost of that on an annual basis may not rise to the level of something like this. Part of that's risk management driven as well. I will say, I think TCPP, there is opportunity in corridors in certain key areas where you want to have an arboretum trail and a bigger footprint to explore tree planting in the right of way. But I think our goal is to really tie it to the intent and purpose of the TCPP dollars. And what Karen mentioned is that the primary use and focus of that is to acquire land for conservation. But if that is implemented in a way where it's somewhat of a hybrid like this, or an arboretum trail, and there's right away adjacent land, it makes sense to us. But as a pure just source of money to plant hundreds of thousands of street trees, that's not something we're currently considering.
Yes, I'd ask, so taking away maintenance, because that's important, and maybe we'll come back and talk about that. You can hear what you're saying, but I think Tom's point is good. They made the comment earlier, a new tree is just as valuable as existing tree. Obviously, at 15 for a tree is different than 100 for a tree, but it's gonna get there. I think about giving you all the most flexibility, more flexibility. So if you have enough, if you have enough opportunity to use those funds elsewhere, that's great. But if you have the need to plant in right away, and there's money, I'd like for you all to have the availability, flexibility to use it for planting in the right way if you choose to, as opposed to kind of being prescriptive.
We have worked very hard to craft strategic language in the UDO that says this revenue is intended for this use here. That was done so for multiple reasons. One, to protect it from internal and external interest, reallocating that. And so the big vision was to have multiple buckets to go to that work. For example, I know Lori has annual funding for tree planting and for maintenance. Some of that work can be augmented by city tree mitigation revenue that's collected by both groups. That moves over to landscape management, and that goes into tree planting and other work in the right of way. So we don't want to rob from one program for another interest purpose, but when there's an opportunity to check multiple boxes, we want to do that. Canopy care is also something that could potentially look at tree planting on public and private land. There was UDO language, comprehensive plan language that specifically said, let's have a wide lane here, but let's have a lane that allows us to do maintenance on private property, planting in private, planting in public, outreach and engagement, like that revenue, which is currently funded by grant money, currently funded by heritage tree removal mitigation dollars. We're also looking for additional revenue in those buckets because mitigation dollars are great and they're available, it can show up booming, but they're clearly tied to trees that were removed. So there's a big con there as well. So if we could have grant dollars corporately at Lori, because she's managing a really big grant she got from the feds, and we get corporate sponsorship on some level. That'd be great too. I think insurance companies might be interested in something like this. And then we also have,
Street treatment.
there's also an opportunity in the development world to, when there are constraints and you can't plant a tree in the right of way, you can pay in lieu. For example, Midnight Diner, which I was at earlier today. There's a lot of utility stuff in the ground. There's a huge duck bank right there. And it really does not make sense to plant a tree because, Kevin said Duke Energy's just gonna rip it right out. But it doesn't make sense to plant a tree there because it's not gonna grow. And it's not just Duke Energy, it's multiple utilities that we just can't get a tree in there. That development customer, Midnight Diner, I think they pay for 2 trees, 2 street trees that reasonably can't be planted there. So that money goes into the same revenue stream. It goes over to Lori for planting trees. And I believe Lori works really hard to plant those trees in proximity to the proximity. We're not just taking that and, repainting our offices and things like that. There's a proximity component to that. It doesn't make sense to spend all the money that collected uptown in Valentine or something like that.
Is it safe to say though that we're pretty well planted in right of ways? I mean, there's not tons of open right of way space, right? We've done a really good job at planting right of ways that we have to move into this purchasing of properties.
I personally disagree.
So
We've done a good job. We can always do more.
So I will say, we do have a lot of constraints. So if it's an NCDOT street, there's often no opportunity to plant within the right of way because they have clear zone setbacks. So if you see an NCDOT street without street trees, it's probably because it's physically not possible to plant there. So a lot of when the development comes in, they have to plant behind the right of way. So that we have trees adjacent to the street, but it's not a planting strip. So there are some places, and there are a lot of places where in neighborhoods, right now, if a property owner adjacent to where the tree's gonna be planted it really doesn't want a tree, I'm not gonna force it on them because we've done that and they just remove the tree. They abuse the tree, they cut it down, they dug it up, which is amazing, a huge, 3-inch caliber, ginormous tree, somehow the root ball was out. So, it's crazy. So there are, we try to respect that property owner that's adjacent there. We work really hard to explain and help them understand. Some rights of way are too small. We were speaking earlier, under 4 feet, I'm not gonna put a tree there. It probably doesn't have a great chance of growing to its maximum potential. So, I'm not saying that everywhere is planted out there. That's just not, I agree there are vacant areas, and as trees are removed or fall due to storms, which we had a lot this weekend, the areas will be vacated for a little bit too. So.
And I was just going to say with the funding, so obviously if we throw money towards that, then your budget's lesser. So then I don't think we're accomplishing what we're trying to accomplish. This is set aside for one pot, we throw it at another pot, that pot gets less, and now I think we're just not where we need to be. So if the city is going to because you guys have budgets and you gotta justify those budgets, and to me, if we're throwing money that could be used elsewhere, that's something I've already budgeted, we're not really accomplishing that goal.
I have shared a similar view, is that I think we need a rising tide for all of this, lifts all boats. I really think internally, high level, tree staff, we're trying to think and talk more of a tree planting is something almost everyone can rally behind, preservation, but certainly with tree planting the right of way, we are severely lacking on care, Maintenance is a hard word to get behind. We're trying to find ways to get the care of the canopy. Trees are like people. The better you take care of yourself, the longer you're gonna live, the better quality of life, the higher benefits trees are gonna provide. And I think we need more money for planting trees, and certainly much more for maintaining the trees, outreach, awareness.
I mean, we just we're applying for another grant, we did a quick rundown of just 2 corridors and 7,000 trees. It was gonna be about $6 million just to maintain 7,000 trees.
Annually?
Just one time, just to do the work I currently have in my backlog that needs to get done, just for 7,000, we have 200,000 trees. So, you know, it could be, you know, $10,000 to remove a single tree. Could be $500 to $800 to prune a single tree. 200,000 trees.
Wasn't it a grant for like $1 million?
It was $1 million, that's exactly right, which is fantastic, and it's just for corridors of opportunity. It's not for the entire city, it's really the areas that need it the most.
You're just, your backlog price is public. Right, it's not, yeah, it's not, you know, the cost of plant maintenance, which is
Yes. That's
exponentially higher, but, you know, the city trees, the street trees have such a huge focus. They're along the streets, they're along pedestrian ways, they're a big part of the character. You know, we have, I would say, significant funding for planting. I'm sure we're gonna need more to reach whatever our new canopy goals are gonna be after TCAP 2. But the need to maintain those trees is even greater, honestly. It's like when historically government agencies are always great about funding construction. The maintenance of parks or buildings and things like that.
Yeah, can you go over those numbers?
Oh,
No, I was just saying, can you remind us what your current annual budget for tree maintenance is?
yeah, for tree maintenance, it's right around $2 million.
And then that inclusive of the $1 million grant.
No, so
That's the city fund.
what the city is, yes, what we get in our tree maintenance budget that city council approves is about $2 million, and then the extra $1 million from the federal grant, 500,000 is going to street trees within the corridors, 600,000 is going to tree care on private property for homeowners that qualify. And then, so like I said, so some for tree removal, you know, some trees could be up to $10,000 per tree removed. It could be less, you know, if you have a tree.
Sure.
That's not a hard tree, you know, to get out.
So we present that information to city council and say, we have a need of $6 million to maintain 7,000 trees, yet our budget is $2 million. Plus the grant's $2.5 million. How do they respond to that?
I'm not involved in that. I supply data, I supply information to the Director of General Services.
Sure.
And then, of course, you know, he has to work with all the other divisions within General Services.
Yep.
Work on a budget from that point, so, you know, we present the data based on the number of trees we have that we know need. Now, of course, when we have storms, you know, our price tag goes up. We had a hurricane when we were city arborist, it was about 250. Prices from the year, we spent hundreds of thousands of dollars because the hurricanes, back to back hurricanes, and those are big terms.
Sure, yeah, that could
It's-
exponentially increase your
Exactly, right,
so.
yeah, so we have a lot that we have to balance, and we do plant trees in the right way every single year. We know we have to maintain what we have for long term. For tree management, I don't know.
Totally, yeah.
Sorry, but
No,
Lori,
what's
you were talking about like removing trees,
Yeah.
and 10,000 is a lot to remove, of
That's a
course.
question.
But for your 200,000 trees, how much annually do you wish you had just to like prune them and fertilize them and like keep them happy?
Yeah, so we don't fertilize the trees, right now our maintenance is pruning, and that's our care for the trees removal when they die, stop grinding, you know. So, I mean, but realistically, the I love it.
You like what, I'm sorry?
Oh, I'd say $4 million would be fantastic.
I'm just trying to wrap my head around the magnitude.
Yeah,
Yeah, no,
well, only because, you know, we put so much, a lot of our budget additionally goes to storms.
Right.
Ideally, a storm separate fund would be fantastic.
So I wondered, well, first of all, can I follow up a couple of other questions? So 2 million, what was it last year, fiscal 24, what was the maintenance budget? I forgot, and then you told me.
I know.
Was it $1.6 million? Or was it?
It's 1.875.
So a little bit, took a little bit of an increase, $100,000 increase. And then how about the tree canopy, tree planting
Tree planting.
budget year to year? What was 24 versus 25?
Right, so, this year, I've been out of work
If you
for
remember,
months, so.
no, that's okay.
So I'm staying.
Yeah, we're not, or, sorry for break.
It doesn't matter.
Well,
It's like y'all are asking questions, and I can look it up real quick to give you the actual number. I don't like to give numbers.
That's okay. That's okay. I was gonna raise this at some point, and this Mary may not be the right time, Mr. Chairman, but, you know, I've kind of heard me say this before. My biggest concern is injury or worse
Yep.
for a tree fall and maintenance. And so, this is not directed at you or Tim, this is for all of us, commission members, lawyers. There's liability for this as well. The question is, are we doing all that we can, right? I mean, about a month ago, there was a tree that fell. It was on the news. You may have seen it. This woman was walking under it about 20 seconds before it fell. I don't think she's come out of her house since. I mean, I'm so joking, but I think for a long time she didn't. And then this Saturday, another huge, I mean, they're falling. This Saturday, another fell. Both of these were marked by the city, so they were to be torn down, you know, acknowledged at risk. But yet they still fell, and that's not a criticism. It happens, but I don't think any of us around the room would say, well, that's a success. You know, it fell and nobody got hurt. I mean, we gotta get these down. It just seems like a matter of time before something bad. As y'all heard me say this before, it has happened. It can't happen, you know, we all know it can happen again. And I have tried to get people's attention, and we all have to get people's attention. I guess the question is, what else can we do? Because my biggest fear is something happens and I don't want, you know, none of us want that responsibility or have that weight on us. And I don't know if the amendment's formatting, and I don't know what the amendment is. I just don't know how we get that level of attention so that something can be done about other than $100,000 increase, which just doesn't seem to be something that's gonna really.
To Lori's point earlier, as staff, there are very well-established lines of communication during the budget season, and they go up and they're prioritized by leadership, and things are selected and put in for discussion in the manager's office, and the manager's office with budget and strategy, present that to council. That's the staff kind of level. There's advisory boards like this, there's outside influences. The Tree Canopy Action Plan 2 is starting this calendar year. That's going to be an effort to look at 50 by 50 in all our current canopy policy and goals, regulatory, operational programs, and consider recommendations for changes. Public investment is part of that. That's a stakeholder process. There'll be public engagement. Those are just a handful of ways, and I'm sure you're very familiar with everything I just mentioned. You know, this is certainly a topic that the staff walks the line on, as far as clearly communicating how it works for us. But I agree strongly that, and what I've been telling some key people about TCAP 2 is that we're at a crossroads moment for a lot of tree canopy issues. Public investment, maintenance, regulatory. We just went through a huge UDO process. I don't know if we'll have any earth-shattering changes in the UDO world, but I expect some. But in the policy world, the goal world of 50 by 50, it's time to really make some hard decisions. Some bold thinking and action, I think, is needed. And that's not there.
Well, I appreciate that. I agree with all that. I don't think anything I said is new news to anybody. And we all share a common goal with this. I'm just looking for answers. I would add a couple of additional points that may or may not be widely known. One is there are a large number of people that are now afraid of walking under trees in our city. And I don't think that's, and I think that's really bad. I think that's really sad, actually. There are also homeowners taking down healthy trees in their private property because they've seen what happens when a 100-ton tree falls, right? And so that's kind of an unintended consequence of having these issues, but I think it's a real one. So it's not all just funding, it's not all risk. I mean, there's kind of a chain reaction of a lot of things. Yeah, I just don't have, I'm willing to do whatever I can. I think everyone here will do whatever we can to get a lot of this money. I keep coming back to that. There's other solutions, fantastic, but I think a lot of it's just funding. I just don't know how to raise it, or I don't know how to raise the alarm so that other people hear it, because I don't know that people are hearing it like we're trying to ring it as loud as we can and have it, right?
I know we're all trying to get kind of education to help people understand. Yes, when a tree falls, it scares people, but not every tree is going to fall.
Right.
Helping people to understand, the need for care of their trees, not just gonna take it down, get someone to look at it, really make a good assessment. Does that tree need to be removed? Are there things that you can do to mitigate potential issues that a tree can have? And that does take money, right? And time, and sometimes fear can override that, unfortunately. But that is a big push that we're trying to do with a lot of these programs, is to help people to understand really the importance of that canopy and that tree being there and that care, preservation of the tree is possible.
So to Charlie's point about liability, the 7,000 trees, are you saying these are 7,000 trees that are marked for might drop a limb on somebody short?
Now, some of them are just trees that have been planted in the last 5 years that need a first pruning, a structural pruning to maybe lift it, get it higher so cars aren't hitting the branches. Okay, so a lot of trees have actually been healthy over time. So a lot of these trees are smaller. There's a very few trees that needed removal. I think it was 183 trees that needed removal. So very small, but tree pruning can be expensive.
Sure.
So technically, trees should be kind of touched on a pretty regular basis until they're about 20 years, 25 years, and then usually you've got a good form, you've got good structure to the tree, less likely to be damaged in storms. So, getting that initial 25-year investment is expensive upfront, but then a lot less than you have to do that tree for a home. So, like I said, I know one of the quarters, it was literally 183 trees. Very small percent that actually needed to be removed, and some are not urgent. So we do prioritize our work based on the urgency of what we believe, what maintenance needs to happen for that tree. So, and that was everything down to grinding a stump and moving a small tree that was planted.
I didn't know that these were identified ahead of time as potential hazards or trees for removal. But if that is the case, it kind of is refreshing that they were identified, but just didn't last as long as we didn't anticipate.
That's the budget, they're a fair budget, but they don't.
Look, if you call Laura or landscape manager, you all know that, I mean, they're probably out there that sometimes the Laura went out late one on a Saturday or a Sunday. At one time, I mean, whatever it was a weekend, it was a dog day. They're great at marketing, so it's, and I know we can't predict, it's just, I think the lesson is, if we can't predict, don't roll it, we can't really afford to roll the dice, and we think, and one way to come at it may be, I don't know what the backlog is for taking down all the marked trees, but maybe we need a blitzkrieg we need to get all those out of the way. And if a tree is marked and it's, let's not say it has 3 to 6 months, so we'll get it down the next 1 to 2. We need to have some patterns that bring it down in a couple of weeks. And that costs money, and I get all that. I'm just trying to come up with ideas about how to kind of go about doing it differently. Because every time one falls, it has
Another thing to keep in mind, some of these trees are often falling in a storm or immediately after a storm. We do get microbursts here in Charlotte sometimes. There's one on 5th Street, 2018, I think, or 19, I can't remember exactly which year. It was about 7 or 8 trees all fell.
I remember that.
Exactly.
May of 2018.
Yeah.
What was it?
And it was a microburst, and it's hard to predict what's going to happen. What's that?
I said also without power for water.
It's really fair.
I can't remember what year was that, was it 19?
Shit, they all-
It was during COVID, I know that, because everyone was wearing masks
Absolutely,
throughout.
but it is fair to say that if we're taking the effort, while they're young, pruning them and taking care of them, that when they become old, they're less of a burden to the city. That's the approach we're taking.
That is the approach that is our goal, that is my dream, that is when I retire, we have a proactive pruning program. I've got a couple of.
Well, if it helps you to relay the commission members and the commission's raising alarm bells about this, that's why, that's part of why I bring it up. I mean, whatever we can do to kind of get, I appreciate the chain of command, Tim, we've been, that's been there for a while. We hear a lot of people that say, yes, we hear you. I think some urgency is needed to those folks to say, we need you to do more than just hear us. We gotta do something about this.
I look at our meetings budget was increased this year, and it frequently, the last couple of years, it has been increased, so.
Which is great.
So
I know
someone
it's
is
stagnant for a
hearing,
long
which
time.
is,
That's-
which is fantastic,
Yeah.
it's really great, and, doing outside grants and doing something a little bit more creative is helpful as well. This corridors grant is, it's a no match, it's, where a lot of grants you have to match, so this is a no match
Which is
grant,
great.
it's fantastic.
Thank you, and
So,
kudos to you for that.
yeah, I mean, that's something that we're gonna continue to look for, to continue to do that to supplement our budget. Because we do understand there is a lot that needs to go on with the city. Trees are very important, obviously, it's what we've dedicated our careers for, so but there are so many different parts of the city that I understand. Our city manager and our city council does have to put that into consideration as well, so.
I think we need a catalyst, probably multiple catalysts that are more than a spark, I guess, they have to be a really big flash or something, and I hope TCAP 2 is one of those. In general, I'll say, I think external influence carries a lot of weight with council. Certainly staff does internally, but a board like this, a stakeholder group for TCAP, some other nonprofit or interest group, bringing forward similar or the same message, that's something that could work. I professionally think the level we should be at is like a standard funding level to really seriously stand behind with supreme confidence that we're at the leading edge of tree canopy management. We need to increase that significantly, possibly millions of dollars. I just think if you look at the percentage of increases in the budget for the work that Lori's doing relative to the amount of intended strategic policy changes, it's not even close. Something else that I could try to segue is I wanted to show a couple properties that we're looking to acquire, circling back to TCPP. So what we're looking at here is there's the airport and there's the Catawba River. This is generally where the River District development is taking place. So a lot of clearing is taking place on these larger parcels in here. Property we're looking at for TCDP is in this area right here. So these properties here, and let me switch over to the hybrid map. This is River District right here. Development. There is a significant amount of conservation land and tree safe within the River District, but it's bringing in, Henry, top of your head, thousands of homes or hundreds, thousands of homes, thousands of acres of development. So this is something recommended. We're still developing our acquisition strategy, but our tree canopy analysis suggested targeting acquisition in the ETJ or on the fringe in places where there is imminent development, because that was projected as being one of the highest areas of canopy loss in the next 26 years, leading to 2050. So this is an acquisition strategy we're pursuing. In this case, it is trying to acquire this land here along the river. related to urban district development and projected canopy loss significant in this area.
Has there been conversations with major developers in this area to gift the city property?
I mean, with the UDO, we just implemented a new option to donate land to the city or the county to meet your green area, which is tree save requirements. So I think that option is there. I think it's becoming something more known about. Working with Henry the last few months, I know there's been a lot of interest in it. Also, the offsite tree save.
There's in lieu dollars, but is there in lieu land? Can you trade land?
Yeah, you can.
You can.
So can you speak a little bit of that, because I studied a hell of that option provision. So yeah, the ordinance gave us a lot more flexibility on it. I was talking with him about how that gets enforced. That's why we were talking about community area plans, we were talking about like, can I get my larger land developers to basically bank claim for other developments and how that kind of thing works. The biggest impediment to getting more of that to happen is the limited amount of zoning types that allow that kind of thing to happen. So you can only really do that in the good tiers, but most of the cities in tiers that don't allow those kind of things to happen. So greater applicability of those options is how you get more of that to happen.
The zoning tiers
You
don't.
don't ask that question.
Well, it's a balance of interests. We do accept donations. For regulatory compliance, there certainly are constraints, as Tom has mentioned. There's other constraints as well. But it's something we're exploring now more than we ever have before. It's potential that people could, have tree safe bank. There definitely are constraints on what qualifies for the donation option. The actual land that can be utilized as a tree safe bank, I don't think you were referencing that as much as like qualifying to actually use that option.
Because, if mitigation is even an option, that's kind of the thing, right? Like mitigation is not really available for the bulk of the parcels in the city. You have to be basically in the center or drain traffic to use most mitigations. There's a cost to that, or you can do land. But if you have greater applicability, like you have to give up so much developable area to meet the tree ordinance on site that it would be an incentive for these developers to go buy other parcels, use developer money to buy parcels and preserve them rather than give up developable areas. So that's where if this was more broadly applied, you would get a lot more action.
That's kind of what direction I was thinking for the developers actually bought parcels. To use.
It's something that would have to be explored and discussed, and the trade-off I'm sure would be developer, preserving less on their site, so that there's trade-offs there, so we'd have to really, from a policy perspective, see what makes sense. I'm not opposed to it, it's just something that I think we really have to put a lot of thought into. It could be explored more in CTAC too. I want these options to be viable. I don't want to have 10 years to go by and we have one land donation for tree safe compliance. That's a failed reality. So if there's an analysis that really says, no one's doing this because it's not viable, then okay, we need to look at changing it and make it viable or getting rid of it. Same thing with offsite tree safe, which is a very similar concept. You don't have to donate the land, but you have to qualify for the option. You have to have the ability to property ownership, right? Say I'm gonna preserve my tree save in the crescent, I'm developing the south middle, but my land's gonna be preserved in the Babies Ford corridor. You have to qualify for that option first. Related to this discussion from a non-regulatory, we've had a lot of developers reach out and say, I have some land, I'm open to donating or selling at a reduced rate. In every case, it's been land that doesn't have high development value, but we are exploring that as well. We're not just targeting land that could be developed. But sometimes you have to ask yourself if this land is totally restricted by rail right away, and there's no access, does it make sense to spend money on that? We're developing a strategy that helps us make those decisions other than being Tara thinking like, yeah, let's do it. But back to the map, so this is one of the current acquisitions Tara is managing. It hasn't gone to council yet, but it started the mandatory referral process. I wanted to show another example. So,
Anytime like if the land can't be developed anyways, why would you waste your money to make sure it doesn't get developed?
It's a question, I think, yeah, but I mean, there's still value, there's still a conservation value. Like that example of the 10 or 11 acres that we acquired in the south middle. A few acres of it could be developed, the rest of it couldn't, but the value, it really was a nice property in Mecklenburg County with very low invasive species and very just high value conservation value. And we feel that we could probably manage that better than it's just HOA trees in the back. But you have to take that to get to 3 acres that could have been cleared.
I can give a really clear example of how we utilize this, right? Like, so we've been talking about like areas that are going to be preserved anyway, certain floodplains and stuff like that. But say there's a parcel that is really low and there's no adjacent sewer next to it, right? Like that is clearly developable land. But a developer is not going to want to develop it for any kind of intensity because it would require a big lift station or an offsite sewer. So it would get developed, in single family, because we saw on the lake, single family is a destructive force for bad tree management. So it would get developed, in a way that would probably kill trees more. So it's developable land, but you know, the developer would look at it like, hey, I can't get sewer to it, I will give the price of 3 McMansions or whatever on it. Like that's still going to be better, so I can do my fountain development. So like, it's not that it's just undevelopable, it's just not developable in that density. And sewer is a great example of how that could be the factor to that.
This is another property here. Let me zoom out and go to streets version so we can get our bearings here. So this is.
This is what you showed us last.
Yeah, off from thermal.
Yes, yeah, okay. Apologies.
Oh, no, it's just, I was just.
Yeah, so these 2 properties, this is something that is very pertinent to the discussion we're having right now, because there's floodplain that impacts most of this property, just over half of this property. There's a reason it was not developed initially. It's this single family. It's owned by one of these property owners. They wanted to see it conserved at the higher level that he could address. So it's something we're pursuing. We're looking in partnership with the stormwater. We're going to be doing a project there. Okay, well, and those are the updates I had for the tree planting program. I see Sarah has a question.
It's been a little difficult to hear, but I just wanted to add, I'm not sure if there was a statement that, you know, buying land in the floodplain is not worthwhile because it's not developable anyway. I just wanted to add that from an ecological perspective, the land next to waterways is of extremely high value. So regardless of whether it's developable or not, it's of high conservation value.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, that was something I was touching on earlier, is it's not the only variable in that equation to evaluate it. And if you seek only developable land for conservation, then there's problems there, because Mecklenburg County is very big in this program. Likely it's going to reduce housing density goals, but you have to think about competing interests. There's a lot of value in preserving land along riparian areas, wildlife ecosystem, but also trail. So looking at county greenway master planning, that's something we highly value. Certainly has a destructive impact on trees to some degree, but the value of having Greenway Trail through a tree save or TCPP property, there's great value there as well, in addition to ecosystem and wildlife. Mr. Chair, I think I'm going to stop there. I definitely welcome any additional questions, comments.
Thank you for a thorough dive into that, Tim. I appreciate it. Does anybody have any questions for Tim before we move on to new business? Thank you, Tim. For new business, we have tree regulations, and tree ordinance, and it's going to get headed up by Vice Chair Gagne. And you have the floor, Sarah. How are you?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I added this item to the agenda because I've been seeing in Sedgefield a lot of infill development and kind of replacement development of older homes with newer, larger homes, as well as higher density. And a lot of times this mature, healthy street trees are taken down. And so I am very concerned about that. It's my view that street trees and trees on public rights of way are not the property of the homeowner. They're not the property of the city. And so they're a shared resource for all of us. And I wanted to learn more about the regulations that are associated with taking down street trees with respect to development. Just as a first step and just based on those concerns. So I appreciate the staff putting this on the agenda and providing any information that they have.
So we're drawing straws right now, Sarah, to see who's going to answer. Henry got the short one.
I'll start, that's not a big deal. So in our Charlotte Tree Manual, we actually have our city tree policy of when trees are permitted and not permitted to be removed. What you're seeing a lot of times with developments such as Sedgefield is the amount of infrastructure that has to go in for some of these newer developments is conflicting with the existing street trees. So what we're seeing are some of these single family homes are being removed and they're going in and putting in duplexes or triplexes. And the issue is they need 3 water connections, 3 sewer connections, 3 gas connections, new driveway locations. We had one went to the UDO board that actually had an issue because they had to put in fire truck turnaround areas because of the size of the building and to get access for their hoses. So a lot of those are all coming together, and if by the policy, we're not trying to protect the trees as much as possible, but if they're developing in a way that we can no longer protect the trees, or the risk becomes too high that the city's not willing to incur the risk by leaving the tree, then we're going to authorize the tree to be removed. Now, any tree that does get removed, they do have to mitigate for that. So there's a cost to doing that, and then that money goes back into Lori's group, as we previously discussed, to plant additional trees elsewhere in the city. So high level, that's kind of where it is. Individual, it gets really in the weeds on individual sites though.
That's fine. We don't need to get into the weeds. I think my comment that I would like to make, which I've kind of made in the past, but I think needs to be made again, is I don't understand why development trumps preserving street trees. And I don't think it should. I think that's a wrong emphasis. I think we should have infill, the sites can be redeveloped, that's fine. But in terms of trees that are public property, they should be preserved. And so development should fit within the developable space, which should not include the public right of way. And so that's, I think, you know, maybe a culture change or a different perspective, but I think it's a point that needs to be made.
It's well taken. I think some of the other issues we have too are a lot of these trees, their root systems go onto the private property. So then we run into the balance of trying to figure out how much of the public property can we limit for a tree that's in the trunk is in the public property, but the root systems definitely go into the private side as well.
Yeah, I think if we're trying to Sorry, I didn't know. I'll raise my hand next time. But I think in terms, another point I want to reiterate, and I think it may have been Thomas that made this, I'm not sure. But in terms of providing for shared benefits, like reducing urban heat, walkability, aesthetics, what we're finding, you know, mental health benefits of being exposed to trees and the wildlife that they support, there needs to be additional recognition that street trees are the things that are particularly important to that, right? Because they're accessible by the public. So they're in public rights of way, they're in, you know, on transport corridors, et cetera. And I'll just also mention that public trees compared to private trees are the resource that are most inequitably distributed in a city. Obviously, Sedgefield is not suffering, right? Losing a few street trees, but it is, I think there needs to be a distinction made in the UDO if, you know, if anyone wants to pick this up in a revision, that they're not just like any other tree. They hold an important role and they can play a really big impact on citizen experience and the tree, you know, the impacts of the tree canopy as a whole.
Sir, if I could add some context to pivot and implement a stronger preservation strategy policy along the lines of what you suggested would require, I think, some type of council adopted, maybe it's a UDO, maybe it's a policy, UDO regulations, because an example Henry gave of a triplex needing all these three, you know, triplicate of sewer, driveway, fire turnaround, to prioritize tree preservation would effectively prevent that development from occurring, which from a staff level, from my level, that's not something that our current policy allows for. There's a prioritization, and if you're building a single family home, the variables are different versus a triplex on that lot. Tree preservation is likely easier and more likely to occur for a single family detached home. But if that site allows, zoning and everything allows a triplex, that likelihood, you know, tanks pretty quickly. And from a staff perspective, our authority, our policy foundation does not allow us to say, you have to save the trees, figure out a way to do it, or, you know, change your development type. I do think, just for clarity and expectations, I want to say your comment about a UDO provision or something clarifying that. I think that's a level of, I'll say, policy change will be required. A lot of hands.
I was just gonna say, so in that triplex example, obviously we spent some time talking about meetings ago about, there was an article that I wanted to discuss about triplexes and increasing density. So kind of goes hand in hand with this, right? Like the city wants to increase housing density. The result is triplexes or duplexes, but then the result of that we're now seeing is it hamstrings your guys' ability to protect city trees, which I think is very surprising. In that example that you described, is there any point in the process when, like, your staff or UDO, a board much like ours, but that the UDO board has to approve the removal of that city tree, or are you guys just trump by current policy? And like, is there a point where you say we agree or we don't agree with this, or is it just policy? Our hands are tied. This tree just gets removed, so we have no power.
So staff will follow the policy on the screen. The city tree, it's a mitigation policy that says, here's when we allow authorized removal. So during plan review or outside, I'll speak for Lori, outside of a regulated workflow that comes through Henry's team, city tree staff will work tirelessly to preserve the tree. The tree can't be removed. However, there's no oversight authority that comes into kind of validate staff's decision. If there is a hardship for this policy that exists, then we allow the tree to be removed.
I guess what I'm getting at is if there's any circumstance where a public tree has to be removed, should that not come to either this board or the UDO board for determination, or come to you guys for determination on where that tree should be?
So I will say during the plan review process, we try to evaluate what changes can be made to try to preserve the tree.
Right.
A duplex, I think, is a much better scenario because it's more applicable across the city. If you've got a 50-foot lot, duplex is generally on a 2-car driveway. So that's 20 feet for each driveway. They want the driveways roughly 10 feet from the property line. So we've just taken up 60 feet between driveways and two small areas to minimize. Now we have to put in all the utilities, and utilities want, I believe it's 5 feet between taps. So you do 5 feet between taps, there's not enough space for everything to compete. So it gets really complicated. So our staff tries to say, hey, can we move, let's shift all the water lines into this location. Can we adjust the driveways to, instead of one large driveway, can we do 2 smaller driveways on the side? We try to do that through that process, but eventually we're dealt with, you only have so much space and X number of things have to go there sometimes. And it creates hardships.
And staff on both teams, we do authorize removal. So it does come to city staff to make a determination. And if it doesn't, and it's removed illegally, then we're aware of it, and there's a penalty process. To Henry's point, there are things that per policy, we have, I guess, the authority to require adjustments. And there's those are requirements, and then there's requests. We request, can you try to articulate all these things on your property to provide X amount of offset from this tree to preserve it? And if the combination of what we can require to move and what we collaborate on with the development customer, if they align, then we've achieved preservation. It's often extremely difficult to do that. So that there is a set number of things that we will require to be adjusted. There are some things that we don't, that are more of a request.
A good example of where we do really push hard back is, let's say a site has an existing driveway, they want to put in a circular driveway and have 2 entrances. If you already have 1 entrance and your second entrance is going to take out a right-of-way tree, we will not authorize that because that doesn't classify as a hardship. You have access to your property, your utilities aren't competing if you want a secondary driveway. So in those situations, we can definitely push back and go, no, this is not authorized hardship. That's a method that we can definitely push back on. Most of those circular driveways, though, are on existing sites. They're not on redeveloped sites, though.
Which that will come to our staff as well, if it's not in a development situation. And we do the same exact thing. If you have access. Probably not going to. Now, keep in mind, people put in circular driveways all the time down. So, a lot of times we'll come to Tom's and we're like, so, yeah.
I see Sarah, Ghani's hands up.
The other thing I'll mention that I've noticed in Sedgefield and thinking about this discussion. So this discussion is very parcel based, right? So looking at particular parcels and approving for that particular development, but there are impacts at larger spatial scale. So for neighborhoods. So for example, the stretch of Poindexter, anyway, I mean, I don't need to get into specifics, but whole blocks basically have now been denuded of mature willow oaks. And so it makes a big difference to the character of the neighborhood. And then presumably the desirability of living there, maybe, I don't know, but I think that idea of, interacting with neighborhood character and the things in the 2040 comprehensive plan that have to do with neighborhood and walkability somehow, if possible, should be considered in these decisions as well.
I think that's well said, and related to those concerns and issues, something we plan to do at TCAP 2 is some type of analysis and modeling of, we have the 2040 plan with place types, we have the UDO, we have these new zoning designations, we have this new emphasis on density and housing. What are we getting by this place type, this zoning designation, this type of product? What is the average canopy percentage? What are we seeing with street trees? And then modeling that out to suggest canopy cover, stocking level of street trees, things like that, related to interests such as urban heat, character, and character is outside my lane, but that's definitely, the aesthetic and character is a big part of it. Property values might be in there, but we're really focused on equity as well, which covers a lot of things. So we want to know more about what's going to happen with this new type of density, this development we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of, I don't know if I call them subdivisions, but I think they are, like large subdivisions. Like there's been a pivot from traditional single-family detached homes to a higher volume in permitting anyway. We've seen triplex focused with a new type of design. We're not certain from a tree perspective what that might mean long-term for canopy and impervious cover and things we want to look at just to have a better foundation of knowledge to know, like, what does this mean? What's happening here? If you build triplexes down the road that used to be single-family detached housing, I could understand very easily how you might have a great reduction in street trees just because of all the things that are competing for space in our current policy for permitting. When we weigh things like fire truck turnarounds, sewer lines versus tree preservation.
I just wanted to say that, Sarah, what you're talking about is sort of like prioritizing that land in a way that maybe, and respecting it in the way that like a floodplain is prioritized and respected. Like you could not develop a triplex in the floodplain, no matter how much the owner wanted to, because we've all agreed that this serves a good, to the public, and it just doesn't seem like the damage done by eliminating street trees is as apparent to people, such that they would, respect it similarly. So to your point about thinking through what the damages are of tree loss generally and maybe specifically street trees.
Yeah, what's the trade-off here on our canopy cover, street tree population, and then how that relates to ecosystem services, wildlife, populations, equity things that goes on. It's just, what does that mean? We've had a traditional perimeter tree, internal tree save model for a long time. Now we have heritage trees. So there's four, from a tree perspective, primary regulatory areas. I want to know better, what is that getting us? We have changed and increased preservation and planting requirements in the UDO, but we don't know for certain. What is that getting us per product, per triplex, per duplex, per, other types of development, subdivision development for residential. And can we tie that to goals like 50% canopy coverage? Do we have canopy cover goals by place type, by zoning designation that, along with our planting programs and the multi-prong, because we can't regulate our way to our canopy goals, we can't plant our way. It has to be a combination. So I just want to know more about what's happening in all those areas, especially development and density related to what our canopy goals would be. So I'm hoping TCAP 2 provides us some really data-driven realities where we can say, okay, maybe we need 20% tree save in certain types of residential subdivisions, and we only need, 8% in these types of core urban dense areas because there's no way to ever get 50% canopy there. So let's shoot for 35. And over here in, the lower density areas, let's shoot for 65. I just made that up on the fly, but I want to have that level of detail. And how does that coincide with wildlife focused policy and pollinator, the bee city policy the city now has? I'm looking at Laura because that's something that her side of the tree world, led. We want more data to be more informed to make decisions. And I think Sarah, what you're talking about could be one of those hard decisions, or it's a hard discussion to have, and what the decision might be, I'm not sure, but it makes sense to at least have more information, to be more informed, to have that discussion.
Isn't that discussion a little bit directed by state law and what you're allowed to do with property rights? Like for example.
Absolutely.
And they were talking about the tree roots, right? Like, is if the property has an allowance to be developed and those roots are on my property, like he can't stop me from cutting those roots out. Like that's more of a state level, like that's like outside of Charlotte's hands, right?
That had very well, yeah, we'd have to have that understanding as well. We do to some degree now already, but if there was a large effort to prioritize right-of-way tree preservation that could potentially reduce density on a parcel, we would want to know that very clearly, what our ability is to regulate within the right-of-way and then on the property. As of right now, we've fairly consistently, we don't have any significant strong preservation requirements for city trees across that line. I mean, there are some things that we do work out with customers, but we play it very safe, and we don't really have a hardline approach on the private property when it comes to preservation of city trees. And I'm gonna look now at my colleagues here.
I think she's intentionally standing in the corner.
No, I had to stand up, I can't say.
I think Sarah had a question.
Oh, no, and I was going to mention about when the city obviously made a decision about the two triplexes. It was, I mean, they had to know that there was gonna be loss of things, so that trumped. And I'm sure there were some analysis that maybe some information they had from the different staff. But it's all kind of a guessing game in essence, because you're not sure of how stuff's gonna be developed, but. So they made that decision, I think, to lose those trees in essence. But with this analysis tying like, hey, we lost this many trees due to the triplex decision the city made. And like basically saying it that way to tie it to their decisions may have an impact, may not have an impact. So I was just making sure, like, we can say, oh, the triplex has got this, but when you say it's because of the decision you guys made, it's just an awareness to them of impact. And I know they understand the impact the decisions they make probably have, but maybe not to a certain degree of a level. And the only other thing I was gonna ask is the fire truck turnaround, I think you mentioned. I assume, because I'm not part of like planning processes like other that we have here, is a plan is hopefully fully developed. If a developer forgets something, let's say they forgot something, is it noticed right away? Is it something that later on is found like, oh, actually you need to put this on the plan? Is it possible that some developers might just forget to put stuff on there so that they can kind of get around being held to a standard that should be there, but because they forgot something that's really important, I'm not sure.
So I would say generally staff, because all the reviewed agencies review it at the same time.
Okay.
And so as I'm looking at it, Charlotte Fire's looking at it, Stormwater's looking at it, everyone's at the same time.
Okay.
Once everyone completes their review, they package up, send it off and say, hey, these are the things you need to fix.
I see.
And that happens 5 times.
That's the issue you have. But then they send it back. And then everyone looks at it all over again and says, you did this, you fixed this, okay, oh wait, now you create a new issue over here. Then it goes back and forth until it's approvable.
Okay.
Then if something gets missed, say sometimes with issues with sites, it's the grading, something happened with the grades. Rock has been an issue lately where they'll hit rock and it's like,
Right.
now we need to change the plan.
Unknown issues.
Unknown issues come about, so then we need to change the plan. So then we submit a new plan to the city called a revision,
I see.
and then we do that whole process all over
Oh,
again with the
okay.
new revision. So we go back and forth on that to make sure that everyone's fully aware of everything we can to the best of all of our abilities.
Sometimes it's timing, if the urban forester reviewed it prior to the fire department's reviewer, and the clear understanding of what and where that fire access point plan one might be preservation, yeah, looks great, and then,
Plan 2, trees are gone and there's fire. Where did this come
I
from?
do think that if there was a trade-off between the fireman trying to get to.
Yeah, you can't argue the fire.
As much as I want to save the tree, it's.
Right.
no,
I was just making sure a developer didn't just, oh, well, we'll put that later, but.
If it was that easy,
then
but I mean,
not gonna develop.
they remind you all the time that the ordinance has to be followed, right? So if something didn't get caught on the plans, the ordinance has to be followed, it's going to come back in. And-
They're inspectors during construction,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
sometimes what has to be submitted, it varies at times by the type of submittal, that there may not be an extreme level of detail is not required for every type of project, so that also could have influence on the final outcome of tree preservation. I do think staff from all disciplines work really well to have design professionals really have to know all those ordinances to a large degree, and so do staff. And it's difficult to really have a good grasp on cats and CDOT and stormwater and trees. You have to have all staff trained and calibrated as much as possible because you may have a little variation here, which shouldn't happen, but we're all human. It's challenging, and there's also, I will say, sometimes knowing what we have the ability to require versus request. How sometimes it's a couple inches or a foot. Can that fire pad shift 2 feet this way? That might be enough for us to reasonably say it's okay, it's worth preserving this 30-inch tree. If it's an 8-foot trench, I don't think we're gonna allow preservation of that tree because immediately risk management concerns and structural integrity and health. But if it's 10 feet, depending on some other variables, that could be something. So urban forestry will coordinate with other reviewers to see like, hey, what's the fire department's reviewer's name? What's his name? Jeff, yeah, I used to Jeff, Jeff, can you shift this over a couple feet, be okay? Like that happens all day, every day, that type of stuff.
Especially CDOT.
Does that happen internally, or is there, did you go back to the engineers and the architects and then back to it?
Sometimes you get a bunch of different comments that don't correlate with one another.
That's true.
Let's all get in a room and figure out who's important in this discussion.
Yeah, especially with city trees, because road widening projects, multi-use paths, sidewalks, those generally don't agree with street trees. So a lot of times we have a beautiful streetscape and then CDOT's requiring, we need to add extra turn lanes, or we need to widen the road. The trees really have a hard time winning out a lot of the road widening projects. We might have a bit more impact with a multi-use trail or a sidewalk saying, hey, let's meander this around the trees, or let's modify how we do it to better protect the tree. But if it's a road widening project, we really, the ability to try to protect that tree or work around that tree is really significantly limited.
Based on our current policy approach and how we prioritize density and trees and all those other things. Something else that's interesting that I often on a daily basis find just challenging is city trees. If you have a list of like trees that are preserved by ordinance, city trees, I think you could say have the highest level of protection on them in some ways, but they're the most challenging to preserve because the competing interest and our authority to regulate outside the right of way is limited. If you're developing and you trigger full development requirements, a tree save has to happen. You have to preserve that tree save on site, and you can't go in there. And that full tree save area, it's like stay out of it. But on city trees, that right of way line behind the tree, and that transition to private property, like we really have to, some point of state statute, it's really challenging because trees need growth, right? They don't know about property lines above or below ground. It's really hard to save a tree in the right of way when there's all these competing interests, especially when density is increasing.
2 questions.
I'm sorry.
I just wanted to say really quickly, Tim and Henry and Lori, where donde estamos, bebé? that I'm gonna look in the literature. I suspect there might be studies now, like in Minneapolis, St. Paul, for instance, which I think put in the higher density across land uses a few years ago to see if there are impacts on the tree canopy. So if I can find papers, I'll send them to you.
That's exactly the type of stuff I think we want to know about, just to have a better understanding, and if there is concerted effort to move the needle to prioritize preservation higher, we would need that type of information. Certainly local, but other, you know, other places where it's occurred.
Are most of the city trees in a utility easement or are the utilities in a tree?
So, I will put my legal hat on, but, public street right of way maintained by the city, there could be all types of things layered on top of that. Utility easements, utility rights of way.
Is this, I mean, this conversation that Sarah brought up is really important because as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking, are we as people that love and preserve trees benefiting from these utility easements that the trees wouldn't have a place to be if that easement didn't exist?
And so the city has authority to plant, manage, and regulate trees in public right of way. And we have to compete and contend with all the other entities and interests there. So I think if you look at the window here, every street tree you see is probably planted on top of multiple utility lines. I would say mains, I'm not gonna use the word primary, because there's a current dispute over primary versus secondary. And there's been a lot of interest internally, I will say from Charlotte Water, to find a new planting policy that just plants no trees on top of utilities. And I said, there'd be no street trees anywhere if you did that. Or move all yours under the street, you know, that's not good. So to answer your question, I don't know legally, but I mean, there's Duke Energy has rights of way easements, I'm not sure the right term. There's underground, there's aerial, it's all stacked, and certain authorities are stronger than others, and sometimes it's policy decisions by certain entities. Lori, I was going to share anything more than this one.
No comment.
No, I mean, it's something Google Fiber is going through, that's now our reality, preserving that tree.
Pretty deep though, aren't they?
No,
So
I had one shot of it, because they were going like 15 foot deep, and I didn't even care.
Like before they cut off 14.
we are, no, the 6 feet is the requirement from CTAC. And there's some places, like Henry has mentioned in some of their developments, they hit rock and you can't bore through rock, so they have to come shallower, or there's a culvert or something they have to deal with. So there are, they don't, boring is expensive, that is not their preference. Trench.
Reality is subdivisions where fiber optics should be feet deep and the installation is inches. There's probably, I wouldn't try to suggest how many linear street miles, but there are dozens and dozens of subdivisions in residence where insulation did not follow what was required.
So, small local company, like one I'm with, last week incurred $22,000 in damages in fiber optic because we had to plant within an area that had fiber optics. It's almost impossible to absorb that on a regular basis.
So, you know, some, and it's not just Google, it's all sorts of depression, as you said, but there's lots of fiber communities and stuff, the other things that have been in the ground for a long time. They should be 6, and I had a contractor several years ago that a shovel deep severed a fiber line, hand dig, not using an excavator, not using an auger, a shovel, and $2,000.
Still on the hook for it.
And
Yeah. So.
it's hard, it really is, so yes, there are a lot of competing things, and, but at the same time, we need water, we need sewer, we need, you know, we need trees, we need it all. It's a very small space for everything to be in one area. Obviously, like Tim said, my idea is just ground space for trees and just trees, but that's not a reality.
We need trees.
We need a special, like separate toll lane for trees, just. But it's a property taking, though, so to Melissa's point, like,
Yeah.
everyone loves trees, but when you start taking the tree and stacking against power or plumbing
Yeah.
or property, therein lies the challenge.
And I always tell people, I like my power. It's,
Sure.
Duke has to use power and you have to respect that. So we are moving towards planting smaller trees underneath their power lines, so they don't have to. Saves them money, they don't have to come out and do cyclical pruning, and then it preserves the trees.
South Boulevard, at one point in time, planting Chinese elms on their power lines was considered by, I'll say, one of our predecessors, as something that made sense. Bradford Terrace too, there's plenty of Bradford Terrace on our power lines.
And even some creepers that are
Yeah.
40 feet tall that shouldn't have been there, so, yeah, it's, we are now seeing past decisions and trying to move forward.
They have a choice to make decisions, people are just plant red buds under them, so.
What's that? No, we do kusas. No, that's the thing.
There's two choices.
No, iris.
The red buds are diseased now, so I can't.
No, we
Fringe
do,
trees.
yeah, fringe is great, but I feel like, designers, while we do have our approved list, we do, and Henry, please correct me if I'm wrong, we do approve other species as well in that area, so be creative, give us different things, you don't have to put willow oaks everywhere.
That was big.
Yeah,
That's
red buds.
what was on the list.
What's that?
You said we can go off these?
You have to request, you have to talk to the urban forester, we will look at it. We don't want any invasive species and, things like that, but if they're, and for what we do in the right of way, so if you're working, an existing home, you're not doing development, and the homeowner wants to put a tree there, we give permits all the time, we work with the tree planter and say, yes, that is an approved species, let's put that in Charlie, and you guys have done that, so, we are look at other things, doesn't just have to stay with what's in that list. Request something else.
From an ordinance
So you don't request.
foundation perspective, I wanted to share, there's two ordinances with tree regulations, the UDO, D is for development, that's where development applicable regulations are, things like requiring a development project to plant or preserve trees, to provide a tree survey as a submittal requirement, to show critical root zone. The Charlotte Tree Ordinance protects city trees, the clear authority and kind of clarity about trees in the public right of way, street right of way, that they're protected, considered city assets. I'm not certain about the official legal determination of ownership, but they're managed as city assets. I also will say, trees in NCDOT right of way in certain locations are also considered city assets. They're managed by the city and maintained by the city. That was a decision made decades ago related to providing benefits to the communities. Like, we're gonna maintain these trees because we think it's important and valuable. That certainly doesn't help your budget constraint reality today, because there's a lot of NCDOT. And to clarify, we're not talking about interstates, we're not talking about certain segments of Billy Graham, Independence, but things like Graham Street in Uptown, Moorhead Street, part of Moorhead Street, major NCDOT thoroughfares and down, those are considered city trees too, and that's foundational protection requirements are in both ordinances and within the tree manual.
Yeah, that brings up a great question I didn't think to ask until you mentioned it. So the beef with NCDOT and trees in the right of way, clearly, like, they have their driver recovery thing, even though there's a sidewalk in there and they're happy to let drivers recover over people, pedestrians, like, not getting into that whole thing. But is the issue really about maintenance? Because the sidewalk maintenance thing, you guys have resolved it. You guys will maintain, you can put the sidewalks in there right of way as long as it's not the ETJ. Like, so is that the fulcrum to get trees back on NCDOT roads in the city? Then it's just maintenance agreements?
Well, that's part of it, but they're not budging on the clear zone. Like, it has to be the offset of I haven't looked at this in a while, but the lane of travel, the tree has to be a certain amount of feet from the edge of pavement boundary curve.
So it's like where the sidewalk is.
Depends, some are actually further depending on the speed limit.
Yeah.
But I think one of the issues we have, I think Arrowwood Boulevard is a good, or no, excuse me, Arrowwood Road near Top Hall. A development came in there and NCDOT cleared out all the willows and said you can't put anything back there. And it was agreed upon, they were planted, they were beautiful, and then NCDOT changed their mind and said, nope, we're taking out all these, nothing goes back. So it's hard to balance that. If they do let us in certain places, it might be for a short period of time, it might be for a long period of time, but ultimately they can come through and just remove them when they feel, I don't say to change the wind, but sometimes change of leadership, change of policy could alter what trees stay or what trees go.
In the planting permit, you have to apply for a
Right,
planting permit and have that statement if.
But you know what I love about NCDOT? I just wrote them a check today because I took down one of their trees in the right of way, so I had to write them a check.
Oh, jeez.
They're quite responsive on collecting that. They learned that from us. I will say though, and there is a difference between NCDOT transportation staff and the vegetation management staff who work very well with Henry and Lori's groups. Sometimes the vegetation folks get overruled, sometimes it's a triangle type of issue. There's also, that trumps us, there's also a unique reality in billboard legislation. But I don't want to go down rabbit hole, but
Topic, right?
there's state statute and authority given to, it's not just billboards, it's commercial properties adjacent to NCDOT right away that we stay very quiet about this because there is a lot of authority given to property owners adjacent to NCDOT right away for tree removal. And but again, the city still feels that trees, not on the interstates, but trees in NCDOT right away should be maintained to a higher level. Lori's team does that, and they have granted us the ability to collect mitigation, and we can replant if we have a permit on file that they've granted. But again, the foundation for city tree authority, management, and regulatory policy and strategy is built into the tree ordinance, I would say first and foremost, and that connects directly to the UDO and the tree manual. We do not consider trees in unaccepted rights of way, city trees or heritage trees. So, paper right of way, alleyways, we don't do it.
Does the state provide funding for us to maintain their trees on state roads?
It's just like you got them, right?
I think to some degree, yeah, we feel there's benefit in having the authority we have, but to answer your question directly, no. But they will collect a mitigation payment for trees we maintain.
One of those work out, just raise the question, you have to make, it's worth asking someday, probably take 5 years to get it, but.
They're probably just supposed to tell you.
That's a very deep rabbit hole.
I'm just gonna check this. Sarah, did most of the questions get addressed or, I don't know, before we get into too many rabbit holes, I just wanted to make sure we stay on the topic that you were looking for.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for a good discussion.
Thank you.
Any further items related to the street tree regulations? Thank you. Minutes and attendance. We just need to take a motion, take a vote to push that into August meeting. Is that right?
I don't think we have, there's no need for a motion as we
Then,
we're troubleshooting. We'll have it for you in August.
great. Well, there's a motion to adjourn.
Oh, wait, Mr. Chair, if I could, I did want to mention that we have high confidence right now that there are 2 hearings on the agenda for September.
we've heard that before too.
Applications and checks have been submitted.
Okay,
confidence.
and checks, you got
Not
checks.
too much.
Payment and
These
application.
aren't the floating around things I talk about, they are done.
All right,
Has everybody watched the video from Chapel Hill about quasi judicial?
And then Jill did a presentation about our meeting, so she covered
Let's
it.
just making sure so everybody knows their kind of the role, we keep the same kind of.
It would probably have to rewatch it.
yeah, we'd love to, we could recirculate that clip. But the first one, we tackled Kevin, lasted about 30 hours.
Yeah,
So, no, it really not wasn't 30 hours.
It was a long time.
It was a long time for something that
Should have taken.
Yeah.
We got there.
we could recirculate the clip or not.
I'm sorry, we were chatting about vacancy. Yes, we can recirculate the link, and I think at minimum, we should, just have an item next month that just covers core roles and responsibilities.
It's in August, right before the hearing.
Yes.
All right.
And
I don't think we need a deep dive.
just for clarity, the hearing cannot be, virtual, right?
Correct. Attendance is in person is required to participate.
Correct.
We will do everything we can to not hold them in this room.
No.
Well, thank you for that, Tim. We're looking forward to it. We want to help the city in that capacity.
Yeah.
And if there's a motion for, to adjourn,
motion to adjourn.
second, adjourn. All,
Thank you, everyone.
Is there
I was going to ask about, what your stuff.
I